Hello, welcome back to the channel, and today's video is going to be how to build the popular word guessing game Wordle in Python using PyGame. Okay, so Wordle, you've probably heard of it by now if you haven't been playing it and getting addicted to it. It's essentially a word guessing game where you have 6 chances to guess a 5-letter word. If every time you make a guess, if you got a letter correct and in the correct spot, then you get a green marker, so that's a clue for the next time. If you got the correct letter but it's in the wrong spot, you get a yellow marker on that letter, and you only have 6 chances to try to guess the word right. Super popular, but currently the game only lets you play once. So let's say you wanted to play more than once a day. Maybe you should build your own in Python using PyGame. So first thing we do anytime we build a game using PyGame, and I build a lot of my little just widgets for fun in PyGame. It's a super user-friendly module, really easy to get started with. First thing you do is just import PyGame. If you don't have it already installed, you'll just probably want to run pip to install it real quick. There's a million videos on how to do that if you're unfamiliar. But so import PyGame, and then the next thing to do is just pygame.init. And now we've called PyGame and we can use everything inside of it. So next thing, let's just go ahead and get our screen set up, okay, so that we can have somewhere to display everything. So I'm just going to create a constant variable called width, and I'm going to create a constant variable called height. This is a pretty normal way to do it. You can definitely just punch them in when you create the screen, because the next thing to do is make this screen variable and set equal to pygame.display.setMode, and then you give it a size, and that's why I created width and height. But if you wanted to, you could just punch a 500 and a 700 in there. But as you'll see when we're creating the game board and a lot of the stuff we're going to put on the screen, there's actually reason to want to be able to reference width and height and not just need to have it memorized as 500 and 700. So let's go ahead and start there. And that's the screen setup, and then let's go ahead and create a frame rate as well. So if you've seen any of the previous PyGame videos on this channel, you'll see I always create a timer and a frame rate right in the beginning, and that is because you want to control the speed at which your game is played. So a really typical, good frame rate is 60 frames per second, and that's just regulating it so your app runs the same speed on all machines. One more thing, we'll come up here and we'll just set the caption. So that's going to be pygame.display.setCaption, and we'll just call it Wordle knockoff. Maybe don't call it that if you plan on releasing this or using it somewhere, but that's what I'm going to call it. Okay, now just to get a screen pop up so that we can get started, we'll go ahead and just create running equals true. So this is going to be our main game loop, and we're going to say while running. And again, if you've watched a few of the videos on here, you should be familiar with the fact that this is what I'm calling the main game loop. You basically create a variable and you say while that variable is true, do everything inside of this. But that's also how you control, like, once per scan, it does this 60 times per second. You add the timer.tick at your frame rate. So that's going to run this 60 times per second. And then immediately, so that you don't have an infinite loop, you should always put the conditions in here for exiting. And that's going to look like for event in pygame.event.get if event.type is equal to, and then pygame.quit. So I'm going to assume you know a little bit of Python and a little bit of PyGame for this tutorial. If you don't, you can copy it down, you can follow along, and you can ask any of your questions in the comments below. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. But if you say the event.type is equal to pygame.quit, then we want to set running equal to false. And that's how we get out of our infinite loop. So now this is a working game. Okay, so to get the screen to actually show up, let's go ahead and up in our screen setup, I'm going to add a few colors, because color in PyGame is RGB. So if we want a few that we can call just by typing in the names of them, let's just define them in variables up above. So to start, I'll create white and black as RGBs. And right around timer.tick, we're just going to also add screen.fill. screen.fill, and we're going to give it a color. I think actual Wordle fills with like a dark gray, but we'll just do black to get started here. And you can play around with RGB values and settings as much as you want, make it your own. And then to get the screen showing up, we'll do pygame.display.flip, and then right underneath it, pygame.quit. Okay, so this should be all we need right here to get a 500 by 700 window popping up. There we go. And that looks pretty good, but it looks nothing like Wordle, obviously, because we haven't drawn a board yet. So let's go ahead and create a board. And right in the beginning, just to initialize it and so that we can talk about it, I'm going to create a list of lists, aka a matrix, and I'm going to put one row of info in each spot for this matrix. So it is, I believe, 6 turns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. And I'm going to make 6 just rows. Oops, those should be commas. So I'm just going to type this and then talk about it a little bit because it's kind of tricky to explain everything I'm doing as I'm typing it, but I'll give it a go. So to start, I essentially want every piece of the board to have a blank space in it. So this is how I'm going to tell the game how many total spaces to be expecting to see. And so we're going to just follow like the traditional Wordle, which is 5 letters, but you could also use this same format to make it more than 5 letters. But I'm just going to put each row and I'm going to give it 5 blank spaces. And what we've actually done is we've created basically a matrix that's the correct size for our game. Okay. So now what I want to do is I actually want to create a function. I don't want to do this in the main game loop. It would be a lot of code to stick in there, and it's much more Pythonic to create a function. Call it draw board or whatever you want, draw game. And we're going to create a function that we're going to draw the board in. Okay, so define draw board, and let's go ahead and call a couple things. So I'm going to create a variable called turn, and then I'm going to call the board we just made. And the reason I'm going to call turn is we want to show somewhere on the screen what turn you're on, and indicate that, because in Wordle, you know, it's typically just whatever the lowest blank column is, but I think we can make it a little better by maybe indicating the turn that you're on. So call those things first. You could pass them in and pass them back out, but we're not really modifying them here. We're just using them here. And let's use some for loops to create a board. So we'll say for column in range 0 to 5. And the reason it's 0 to 5 and not 0 to 4, so we're starting with 0 and then going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, is when you use this in range, it's not end inclusive, but it is start inclusive. So it's going to go from 0 to 5, but not count 5. So it's kind of confusing, but if you're familiar with Python, that should be old news to you. And then we'll do for column in range, and then just like before, we're going to go one more than we actually want. We're going to go 0 to 6. And what we want to do is we want to draw a rectangle for each of those. So we're going to draw out all of the empty spaces for our game. So we're going to put it on the screen. Let's make these white rectangles because we have a black background, and this will make them stick out. And then we have to start playing around with sizing. So if I say, you know, column times 100 and row times 100, right? Think about spacing them out. We made our screen 500 by 700. We want it to be 5 spaces wide, and we want to use most of the screen. So if we think about splitting the screen into 5 for the pieces, maybe we want to split it and make them 100 a piece. And then 6 times the pieces is going to be, you know, 600, and that'll give us a little space at the bottom for instructions or score or whatever we want. So let's just start here, and we'll probably modify it because I don't think this will look perfect. And then just so we don't have a bunch of rectangles smushed together, we're going to make them 75 wide by 75 tall. So I'll explain this a little bit more when we create it, but these are the 4 things you give every rectangle in PyGame to fully define it. This is an X and Y start coordinate, and then width, and then height. So we'll just go ahead and boot this up. But a couple other things I want to do is I want to give it a width. So I want these to be hollow rectangles with a border of 3. If you want them to be solid rectangles, you just put a 0 here, and that'll give you a solid rectangle. But then I'm also going to make them rounded just because I think it looks nice. That's just me. But I'm going to do that. And so this should, if we go ahead and run it, let's see if I goofed up. Nope, there we go. So it gives us basically the Wordle board, right? It's not necessarily perfectly spaced because it's smushed up in the top left corner, and it doesn't look nicely spaced. So what we'll do there, I always call this a fudge factor, but we'll just add some limits. So if we think, we took 25 off of the total width of the screen. So what if we split that, or off of the width of the grid we gave it? What if we split that and move them both by 12? How does that look? And I think that looks pretty good. It looks a lot more even, right in the center of the screen. So that's the kind of thing you can play around with. I like the look of that. You can play around with it if you want. One more thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to do pygame.draw.rect. And here's where I was talking about wanting to make a indicator of what turn you're on. I'm going to add another color to my color library, and I'm going to make green now. And we'll use this a couple times. RGB. Okay. And I want to add a rectangle on the screen. I want to make it green. And I would like to put this on whatever turn you're on. So we'll always start it just a little inside of the screen. And then we'll take the turn times 100, which is how we spaced out the boxes, thinking back to the previous step. And then we'll add a little fudge factor because we're not going to want this to be the whole size of the screen either. And then we'll do width minus 10. So remember I said you could just type 490 in here if you wanted this game to be, all very rigid, and you were okay with hard coding everything, you could do that. But if you made those variables, you might as well use those variables. So I'm doing width minus 10, and then I'm going to make it almost the entire height of the grid. So that's going to be 90 tall. And then I want this to be hollow again, and I want it to be rounded just because I like the look of it. You don't have to make it rounded, but there you go. So my idea here is as you go through the game, it's going to highlight whatever turn you're on. You could say you don't need to know that because it's obviously going to be whatever row isn't currently filled in. I like the look of this. It's my tutorial. Let's move on. Okay, so we have the board getting drawn. And what I'd like to do is I would like to turn to handling player entries now. So when we have, let's do it this way. Let's write the text of each of the board keys onto the screen, and I'll put some dummy values in. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and let's just get these typed in. I'm going to put some info in just so we can show examples of the data getting written onto the buttons, but then I'm going to modify this and we're going to go back and we're actually going to handle the user stuff. So since we're in the draw board, the other piece of drawing the board is drawing whatever letters have been guessed, right? And that's why we pass the board in. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to have to create a font in PyGame. And if you've done a little bit of PyGame, this is old news to you, but if you haven't, just follow along. Basically, writing text onto screen happens in a few pieces. First, you need to define your font by doing pygame.font, where the second F is caps. And then you can pull a .ttf font file into your program, or you can point your computer to it. If you have a specific look for your game that's reliant on a font, then go ahead and do that. I use Free Sans Bold because it's built in. And I can use it without having to add a TTF file to every one of my projects. So I'm going to just call this title font because it's kind of huge. Let's just call it huge font to be more descriptive. So 56 is pretty big, but that's because we want one character to completely fill the screen. What we're doing here is we're giving the font name and then the font size. And so we're making it 56, but now we've defined a font. And then to actually create text, so we'll call this piece text, and you'll see why I'm putting it inside of both for loops here. Okay, but so I want the title font dot render. So this is step one in getting stuff drawn onto a screen. Okay, And what we're going to do is we're going to say the text that I'm interested in is the board at row and then column. So when you have a matrix or you have a list of lists, you need to index something inside of something that you're already indexing. You just do it this way with 2 square brackets, one after another. And the first one is going to take you to which entry. So each entry is a row, and that's why the first variable is row. And then the second one is going to take you to an item inside of each row. And that's why we do column. So what we're saying here, piece text equals title font dot render. There we go. I called it huge font. I usually call my biggest font title, so force of habit there, but we just called it huge font. Okay, so what we said is, okay, the text that we just put in there, and we want it to be true, and this is getting drawn onto a black background, so let's make it white, okay? And now that alone is not going to draw it onto the screen. What you have to do is you have to do screen.blit, and that's block transfer, I believe. I don't know. It's screen.blit. That's what it is. And you say what text it is that you want to draw onto the screen, and then you give it X and Y coordinates. And so similarly to before, thinking about where we placed these, it's column times 100, but then we scooched all of those by 12, and then this is text, so it's going inside, so we want to scooch it by even a little bit more. So let's do column times 100 plus 30, and then let's do row times 100 plus 25, and let's just take a look at that. So I put some dummy variables, dummy values inside of our board, just so you can see it. That looks pretty good. So this is nice. Every square should have one character in it. So we're representing things pretty true to form here, even once we start typing values in. So this is a pretty good start. And I'm going to go ahead and just take my numbers out and make them spaces again. And the reason I made them spaces is just because they're going to be one character. Whoops. They're going to be one character once we type in the values, and so having a space initially is, for me, it's one character, and it's easier to model that way because we haven't yet started adding values, but those could absolutely just be blanks. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually take a look at what happens when a player presses the key, because that's how you play the game, is you guess at the letter. So to start, I'm just going to create a variable that I will call secret word, and before the end of the game I'm going to show you how to look up the words, so to actually check and see, like look into a list. I've got this second Python file with just a few 5-letter words, and I'll show you how like you bring in a huge list of words and then randomly select from that list. We'll get to that at the end, but while we're just setting the game up, I'm just going to have it hard-coded. And since it's about drive and it's about power and we stay hungry and we devour, we'll just do secret word equals power. Okay, and now let's go down into our event handling. So everything under for event in pygame.event.get is what I consider event handling. And this is where we're going to set up checking what key the player is pressing, okay? So what I'm going to say is if event.type, and we're going to use one that's pretty specific to needing text, okay? So this is actually not the most common event type in PyGame. If you've built like jumpers or shooters or anything like that, you maybe haven't used text input before, but it's super useful for just grabbing the actual text from a key that's pressed on the keyboard. So it's if event.type, just like before, equals pygame.text input. And then we want to check one more thing. We want to check and not game over. And I just like to think ahead about this because we're going to put some restart conditions in there. And at the beginning of the game over is obviously false. But eventually we're going to want to add some like game over conditions and restart. And if the player's pressing keys at that point, we don't want it to do anything. So just going to add that right here, but we definitely would run into it later. So just something to keep in mind. And then I'm going to create a variable called entry, and that's going to be what entry the player just made. And I'm going to set equal to, and this one's a little specific, it's event and then get attribute, because inside of a text input there are a few different attributes, and it's essentially got a dictionary of values, and what the text that was actually pressed is called text. And to show that, I'll actually just go ahead and print the event real quick. And I think this is going to work. I just want to show you what happens. I'm going to press the A key. Okay, there we go. So if you see down here, there's a few attributes. There's what window it happened in, and then there's also the text, but there's also this PyGame specific, like event 771 text input. So when we use this get attribute text, it looks into the attributes dictionary, which is right here, and it's a bunch of key value pairs. And it's checking for a key that's equal to text. Okay, so that's what we did here. And we just set the letter A equal to this variable entry. And now what we want to do is set board at, and then if you think about where we want to write this to, it's going to be whatever turn you're on. So that's telling you what row you're on. And then we need to make a new variable that'll tell you what letter you're on. So we'll call it letters. And to start, I'm going to set letters equal to 0 at the beginning because no letters have been entered. So when we do that though, we're going to set that equal to entry. We're defining a new space. And since we put a variable in there already, but we're overwriting it with entry, it is just going to get overwritten. So you don't have to worry about being space and then an A at the end. It's just going to be the letter A when you press A. But then we have to move letters forward. So letters plus equal 1. And you should be familiar. This is just shorthand for writing letters equals letters plus 1. So whatever value you already had in the variable letters, we're just adding 1 to it. And now I'm just going to boot it up and see if I can type a few. Yeah, so I can do, just letters. That's nice. But yeah, so if I go past 5, it's going to give me this value out of range because we're not checking to see if that's the end of a turn, if you've filled up your letter box. So let's go ahead and create some code in here, just checking to see if letters is equal to, and let me think, when you've added 0 and then you put 1 letter in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, if letters is equal to 5, right, then what we want to do is we want to kind of end the turn. So I'm going to create a new variable that I'll call turn active. And so this is going to just be another condition. So we'll go up here and we'll say and turn active. And what we're going to do now is we're going to just check and only let you enter, it's only going to let you enter a new letter if turn active is true. So if letters is equal to 5, then turn active is going to be false, and then if letters is less than 5, turn active will be true. And I think this will make sense once we add some backspacing in why I wrote it that way, but let's go ahead and make that variable turn active, and to start it's going to be equal to true. Okay, so before we go back in and I show you like what the code we just did does, let's add one more event, which is going to be if.event.type equals, and it's going to be pygame.keyDown. Actually, we should have put this above text input actually, because text input, backspace, the space bar, they're all this kind of event. So if event.type equals pygame, and then it's dot key down. I knew it. I just didn't want to get it wrong. Okay. So if event.type is key down, and then we check if it's a text input. If event.type is equal to pygame dot, and then we'll say k underscore backspace, and it's backspace. And this is not supposed to be event.type. This is supposed to be event.key. Okay. And if it's the backspace key and they've entered something. So we don't want to let them go backwards if there hasn't been any letters entered yet. So we'll say and letters is greater than 0. But if they press the back key, all we need to do is take the board piece at, turn and then letters, because that's the last piece that got entered, right? And all we're going to do is we're going to set back equal to a space like it was when the game started. And we're going to take that letters variable we made and we subtract out 1. Okay, so now I'm going to show if I type in, oh, is it going to work? It is not. What did I do? Oh, it's because this is not supposed to be under key down, just backspace. I am having a goofy day. All right, let's see. So if I type in, my name, we haven't done anything yet to let it go forward, so I can't enter this turn, but I'm typing more keys and it's not erroring out. It's not going forward anymore. And if I start doing board.letters, oh, I did not put a -1 in there. Good gosh. Okay. All right, so let's check that out. Peter, backspace. List index out of range. Oh, this is supposed to be letters -1. Okay, because so once you enter a letter, we increment letters forward by 1. So when we clear out the last one that was entered, we need to do letters -1. Let me go ahead and check this out. I'm going to type in Pete. Oh, I made a mistake. I want to go back. Okay. All right, there we go. So very cool. But I can't enter more letters. So what's going on here? Turn letters -1. Letters. Oh, letters -1 is moving it forward. Okay. Pete, I can go back. I can go back twice, and I can enter more letters. Okay. That was a fancy bit of troubleshooting there. Not fancy at all. Just irritating. You got to be careful with case, and you got to be careful with negatives. So I had letters -1, which is actually adding 1 to it. So that's why I wasn't able to enter more letters. But we've got it working now. You enter letters, and once you've filled it out to 5, it won't let you enter any more letters. But before you have gone on to the next turn, you can enter backspace or you can hit the backspace key to change your guess. So that's cool. Let's go ahead and do the next piece, which is going to be moving the game forward. So actually taking a guess, getting feedback, and then moving on from there. And you can use enter if you want. I'm actually going to use space for entering a guess, just because I prefer it. But so if they enter space and the game is not over, then what we want to do is basically just increment turn. So we want to do turn plus equals 1, and then we want to set letters back equal to 0. Okay, so that's all space is going to do. And I'll go ahead and show this. So if I do my name and then I hit space, I'm on to the next one, and I can type in. I can do that. I can hit space again. So the turn mechanism seems to be working, but obviously what we aren't doing yet is checking if it's if we got any of the letters right or anything against our secret word. And I'm actually not going to do that in event handling. I'm going to create another function that's basically called check words. And so just like drawing the board, I'm going to isolate the piece of code that checks our answers, and I'm just going to put it into its own function. That's very much so the way Python was intended. Like isolate your key functions into their own spots. So what we'll do is just like before in our drawing of the board, we're going to call a few things. We're going to call turn, and we're going to call the board, and we are also going to call the secret word for this one, because a lot of what we're doing is comparing to the secret word. And now what we're going to do, we're going to use some more for loops pretty similar to what we just did for the full board drawing. So for the full board essentially, and you could put this same code up above if you wanted. It could be considered part of drawing the board, but I like to see where the different pieces are coming from. So essentially, this double for loop is just going through every piece in our matrix every time the routine scans. And what we're checking is to see if the secret word at position column, and that's all we have to check, is off of the column, because it's going to go through each row individually, but the secret word is not a word inside of a list or something. It's just a word. So if the secret word at column is equal to, and then the board piece at row and column. So we're checking a specific character, but we only want to do it for turns, for pieces after we've finished the turn. So we'll say and turn is greater than row. So this is only going to check for pieces that the row is behind how far you've gone, and it'll look good once we run it. That should make a little bit more sense. But we're going to go ahead and draw a rectangle, and we're going to draw it on the screen, and we're going to make it green. And let's go ahead and put it basically in the exact same position as the first rectangles. So we want it to look like it's not even a new rectangle. We just want it to look like we're changing the color of the previous rectangle. So this is how I'm choosing to do it, and you for sure could do it a few different ways. You could actually try to modify the original statement to where this is going to check for correctness and color your rectangle based off of that. I'm just going to draw a white rectangle in every spot and then draw a colored rectangle if they got it correct or partly correct. But I'm going to make this one solid, so where I was talking about before with the 0, and I'll still make it rounded. And then the second piece to playing Wordle is if you get a letter correct. So if the piece at board, row, and then column is just in the word, but not in the correct position. So I'm going to use an elif because we don't want it to check if it's, we don't want to color it yellow if it was already green. But what I'm going to say is just if board at row column is in secret word and turn is greater than row, just like before. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this rectangle, and we're going to have to make one more new color. And we're going to make it yellow to really replicate what's going on with Wordle. And we haven't made yellow yet, so we'll go back up here underneath green. And let's make yellow. And now if you're not familiar with the color wheel, yellow is what you get when you have red and green and no blue. Feel free to play around with your colors as much as you want. But that's it. So that is going to give us yellow and green letters when we go on. And since we know the word is power, I should be able to test this. I'll do bow, and I'll do roo. And you can see that we're getting the solid rectangles, which is nice, but they're over top of the other rectangles. So here's a really important part of PyGame. These are happening in the order you see them here. So it's going screen.fill, drawing the board, and then checking the words. All we have to do to get that not overwriting is check the words before we draw the board. Okay, so let's go ahead and check. And you can see we got 3 greens. Let's do, I have a few special characters in there. Okay, and so we get yellow and we get green, and that's nice, but man, white is hard to read on top of those colors. So let's add another color, and let's just make the text gray, because gray is something that we'll be able to read on top of black, on top of white, on top of green, on top of yellow. And all we have to do to modify it is go down where we define the piece text and change the color from white to gray. And let's see. So you can see it looks fine on black, and then it looks fine on green, and I guess it looks fine on yellow too. So I like the gray. You definitely could pick any color you want. You could even make it to where the text draws a different color once the pieces behind it are colored in if you want, but gray looks good for now. So what you probably noticed is nothing happens when the game is over, and that's really the next important piece. Is we need to check and see if the game is over. So we're going to go ahead and come down underneath our event handling, kind of where we check the turns against the letters, and we are going to add some code to go through the secret word and check it against the guesses. So we'll say for row in range and 0 to 6, because we're going to go through every row. And we'll just say guess is equal to, because what we don't have is we don't have a really nice put together concatenation of all of the board pieces. So we need to concatenate all of them. You could do a little for loop here if you really want to. I'm just going to do it this way because it's only 5 letters. It's really not going to take long. And what I'm doing is I'm taking the 5 characters that have been entered and I'm just setting that equal to this variable guess. Okay. And then what I'm doing is I'm checking to see if guess is equal to secret word. And then I'll also say and row is less than turn, because we don't want to actively show you that you got it if you haven't pressed space yet. Like, you have to commit to the guess. So that's why I'm adding the and row is less than equal to turn. But that's how we're going to set game over equal to true, is basically just have you gotten the correct word in one of your past turns. Okay, so that should be pretty simple. That should make sense to you. This piece of code is pretty basic, but let's go ahead and check that. Let's just get the word right real quick. We'll do sweet word. Okay, we got it right, and it's not doing anything. I'm not able to type any more letters. I'm not able to hit backspace or space, which is good because you shouldn't be able to do anything. But we want to create some code that'll like tell you, hey, you won, and then also tell you how to like restart the game if you want. So to do that, you could put this in a function, but it's really basic stuff. So I'm actually just going to put it down here and say if game over. Actually, let's do 2 different things. If game over and turn is greater than 6, so that means that game is over, or turn is equal to 6. That means the game is over because you didn't get it in time, right? Because we start at 0 and then you get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as chances. So if turn is equal to 6, then what I think we should do is we should make a variable called game over text. Actually, let's be harsh. Let's call it loser text. And just say, what do we call it? Huge font dot render. This might be too big. We might have to make another font, but let's just start here and say loser. Sweet. Let them know. And then we'll say true. And why don't we make that, I don't care, just white. So we'll make white text, and let's go ahead and throw it on the bottom of the screen. So screen.blit, what do I call it? Loser text. And let's put it in a good spot, which is going to be somewhere down at the bottom, 400 by, I don't know, 610. Get it out of the way. And the other way you can lose is actually, or not lose, it's game over. But if game over and turn is less than 6, then what we want is winner text. Winner text. And we will just say winner. And we'll put it in the same spot because these two are never going to be the same. And actually, I'm thinking about it. We never indicated that game over was true when turn is equal to 6. So I think what we need to do is actually just change this to if turn equals 6. And then game over equals true. Okay, so I think this is going to be sweet. Let's go ahead and check this out in both conditions. So let's just say you get the word. Oh, winner text. Yeah, I forgot to change it in both places. Winner text. Okay, let's go ahead and just get the word right first. Power. Nice. Winner, it shows up there. It looks fine. Now let's see if we can lose the game. Shouldn't be too hard, because we know what to avoid. Polar, sloop, pow. Wow, I almost typed the right word. That would have been really stupid. I'm trying to lose. Slout. And rinth. I don't know. Okay, and it tells you loser. Okay, sweet. But now what I think we should do is build in some code to where we're going to repurpose the space bar. So right now, if the key is space and it's not game over, then we move on to the next turn. I'm going to say if you press space and it is game over, then what I want us to do is use this space as basically a reset. So I want us to go back to the beginning and say turn is equal to 0, letters is equal to 0, and then game over is false. And then one more thing I want to do is I want to reinitialize the board. So up here when we defined it and we had it all emptied out, I want to empty it out again when we hit restart. So I want to put it here, and that should be all we need to do to get it to restart. So sloop space. Actually, I can just space it out with empty. Oh, but it's gonna be kind of mad if I don't enter anything. Okay, let's do power. I got it. And now game over, so I can't type anything else. I can't hit backspace, but if I hit space, it reboots the game. Except it moves us to the second line. Let's take a look here and see what's going on. And game over. I hit space and turn is equal to... Oh, it's because... So again, order matters. This one should be above because I was hitting space and it was setting turn equal to 0, but then it saw game over was no longer true and I had hit space, and then it added 1 to turn. So if you get some crazy stuff that makes absolutely no sense when you go through your code line by line, chances are you've got something goofy going on in your order. Okay, and it looks like somewhere we're getting something, yeah, adding to letters as well. So let me see here, because this one is a little bit trickier for order. We're going to move this whole event type up above event key down. Okay, so that way it's not going to write an order. It's not going to write a letter for us. It's not going to move a turn forward, and it is going to restart the game. Okay, so let's do that. Power, sweet. It's about drive. It's about power. And it's still adding 1 to letters. Man, that is... Letters -1, you press space, we put 0 into letters. All right. Well, let's go ahead and add something that I think's super important to this, which is not just having a hard-coded word. So that's kind of a boring way to play this game, is to have the whole word, have someone come over and play your game that you hard-coded the word. A more fun way is going to be if you create a list of all of the words you want to be able to guess from. So, you know, you can have this in a text file, you can have it in a Python file. It's really easy to access if you have a Python file. So I just made a list, made a variable list called words, and I'm going to import that file. So that file is called words, and then I'm going to have the secret word be equal to... And here's where it gets a little funky if you're not smart and with your variable naming. So from word.words, which is the list that I made, I want to use random.random integer. And so I'm going to need to import the random module as well. So I'm going to import the random module. And then from the random module, I want to use the built-in random integer tool. And I want to select a word anywhere in that range. So from 0 all the way up to the length of the words.words list. And then I'm going to add -1 because that could go out of range by 1. It could go off to the right by 1 for your list. But what this is doing is it's just going to, at the start of the game, randomly grab a word from the list, whatever your list of words is. You could use a dictionary API and look up all available words. That would be pretty wild. I'm just going to do a human curated list just like this. And then one more thing, if you're going to do it that way, then you have to make sure wherever you do your restart logic, you also put in the secret word lookup. Otherwise, you're going to get the same word every time you boot up the game. Okay, so this, I believe, should give us a word that's not just power every time. So we'll take a look. Unsupported operand type for list and lists. Let's take a look and see what I did. Okay, that's in our lookup. So the length of word.words That's right, because this is going to give us an integer. That's going to give us an integer. And then we do with parentheses. Okay, that should do it. I'm going to have to change that in both places. So what I had is I had put the -1 inside of the length statement, and it needs to be after the length statement is closed. So that's right there. Now let's go ahead and play the game. And I'm going to pull up the words list just so I don't get stuck. Let's try my name. Okay, we get an ER at the end. Is it power? That would be wild. It is not. Okay, that's a good sign, actually. Then it's probably loser. Okay, we got it. Let's hit space, see if we get a different letter, or a different word. So we'll do angry. We've got an R somewhere in there. Let's do super. Oh, it was super. That's actually pretty wild. I got it. Okay, so you can see this game is still not fully fleshed out because I don't have a whole lot of words. I just didn't want to spend a ton of time making a word list because from what you've seen in this video, you can take it, you can make it your own. I hope you like the tutorial. A few things just to talk about it that I would consider adding for your game to make it more fun to share with people. You could add high score tracking. You could add a tracker to see your average, so how many turns it typically takes you to solve it. You could add all kinds of stuff. You could make it to where you could select how many letters to play, so you could play a 4-letter version, a 6-letter version, and make the size of your screen scaled to however many letters you want to play. There are so many different ways you could take this. You could take the basic Wordle game that people know and love, and you could expand it out to basically be your own game in a million different ways. If there is enough interest, if I see enough comments asking for like a follow-up or that fleshed out version to really take it the extra mile, I could do a video, but I really recommend you guys as programmers spend some time, add the features, have a little fun with it, and let me know what you decide to go with, because I love seeing feedback saying, hey, I did it, I added these things, you know, how did it, what do you think of that? So I hope you liked the tutorial. If you have any questions about anything you saw here today, feel free to leave me a comment. I will get back to you as soon as possible. If you have found this content or anything else on the channel useful, I really appreciate a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a ton as I'm getting going here, and I try to crank out a lot of great content just like this. So as always, thanks for watching and good luck with your code. Thanks.